My boss once told me he practically owned me, so I decided to make him prove it in front of a judge and ended up ruining his entire world. I had been with Meridian Financial Services for 4 long years when my supervisor, Gregory Ashworth, spoke the words that would lead to his downfall. We were standing in his sleek corner office high above the city when I informed him that I wouldn't be working over the holiday weekend because my daughter had her very first dance recital. He leaned back in his overpriced leather chair, smirking, and said that I didn't have the right to refuse, that when I signed my contract, I agreed to be at his disposal whenever he wanted, that he literally owned me. I remember gripping the folder in my hands and feeling something inside me click, not rage exactly, but a sharp kind of understanding. "You own me," I said slowly, and he smiled as if he'd made a brilliant legal argument. He went on about how my time, skill, and output all belonged to him under the agreement, that my productivity was his property. I nodded once and walked out without another word, but the idea had already taken root. If Gregory Ashworth truly thought he owned me, then he would have to prove it, in court. That night I dug out my old employment contract and read every page carefully for the first time since signing it 4 years earlier. It was 73 pages long, a red flag I'd ignored when I first took the job out of desperation, fresh from my MBA program with loans weighing me down and a 6-month-old baby to care for after my ex vanished. Back then I would have signed anything just to keep food on the table. Now my hands trembled as I turned each page and saw how much of myself I had unknowingly given away. Clause 14.7 said that every idea, creative project, or intellectual work I produced belonged entirely to the company forever. Clause 22.3 demanded I be available at any hour, even on weekends or holidays, and Clause 31.9 required written permission before I could take on any outside work or start a side business. Each paragraph was more restrictive than the one before. The contract didn't just employ me, it owned my time, my creativity, and a part of my life itself. But Gregory had overlooked something crucial. If he claimed to own me, then by that same logic he was legally responsible for me, for my well-being, for everything that came with ownership, and I planned to make that argument count. I spent the next 3 days diving into employment and contract law, discovering something I'd never heard of before called unconscionable contracts. After hours of research I made an appointment with an attorney named Patricia Auney, a sharp-minded labor lawyer in her 50s who had the kind of presence that made you feel both nervous and safe at once. I explained what Gregory had said and handed her my contract. She read in silence for 20 minutes, then looked up with a knowing smile that told me she'd already seen the flaw that would destroy him. "This agreement is absolutely outrageous," she said. "Half of these terms wouldn't survive 5 minutes in front of a judge. But if your boss truly believes he owns you, we can use that belief against him." Over the next hour she outlined a plan so meticulous it almost made me laugh. If he insisted I was his property, then under the law he'd have to treat me like it. Property needed care, maintenance, insurance, compensation for wear and tear, things Gregory had never considered. Patricia took my case on contingency, meaning she'd only get paid if we won. That alone told me she was confident. For 2 weeks we gathered evidence. I documented every late-night call, every holiday demand, every sick day refused, every personal comment or controlling order. By the end I had a thick folder full of proof that for 4 years Gregory had acted exactly like a man who thought he owned me. Our first move was simple but devastating. I stopped showing up for work. Patricia sent a formal letter to Gregory and Meridian's legal department declaring that since Mr. Ashworth had explicitly claimed ownership of me under the employment contract, I was now to be treated under property law, not labor law. As company property, I was not required to report to duty on my own but instead to be transported, maintained during working hours, and returned to appropriate storage after. They had 48 hours to either provide these arrangements or release me from the ownership clause. Gregory called my phone 37 times that first day but I didn't pick up. Patricia sent another letter the next morning listing my maintenance costs as property, housing because property must be properly stored, food because it must be kept in good condition, healthcare and mental support due to stress caused by ownership, clothing allowance to ensure professional presentation, and depreciation compensation since property loses value over time. The total reached around $300,000 per year, not counting my salary. Meridian's legal team responded in less than 6 hours, insisting the contract did not literally grant ownership and that I must return immediately or face termination. Patricia replied with elegance and force. She filed a civil lawsuit demanding a judicial decision on whether Gregory Ashworth and Meridian Financial Services legally owned me or whether I was an employee protected under labor law. Included with the filing was a recording from his office where he'd said those exact words, captured clearly because I'd been recording meetings for months ever since he stole credit for my work on the Donovan account. The recording was undeniable and his voice rang with arrogance and certainty. Within 3 days the lawsuit hit the local business news and the story spread fast. Soon other Meridian employees contacted Patricia. They had signed similar contracts and endured the same treatment. Within 2 weeks 17 people were ready to join, but my case would be the first to test everything. The preliminary hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. During that time I was technically on unpaid leave. Patricia promised that once we won the damages and back pay would more than cover what I lost. Still I had to use my savings and take small freelance projects just to stay afloat. My daughter asked why I didn't go to work anymore and I told her mommy was fighting to make things fair. She didn't completely understand but she smiled and said she was proud. Meanwhile Gregory's legal team tried every trick to get the case dismissed. They called it frivolous and claimed I was wasting the court's time, but Patricia had built the case too solidly for that. Each motion to dismiss only made them look more desperate. The judge, a composed woman named Harriet Lou with 20 years on the bench, grew visibly irritated with Meridian's lawyers. During one hearing she interrupted and said, "Counselor, your client told this woman he literally owned her. Either he meant it and we must decide what that means in law or he didn't and he's been operating dishonestly with his staff. Which argument would you rather make?" The attorney went pale and asked for a recess. That was the moment I knew we had them. During that break Patricia explained what was happening. Behind the curtain, Meridian's insurance company was panicking because their policy didn't cover something like this. Ownership of employees wasn't employment, it was something else entirely, and the board of directors had begun questioning Gregory's behavior and the contracts he'd designed. What was supposed to be a preliminary hearing turned into a full evidentiary one because the judge wanted every detail laid out. Patricia called me first to the stand and I described in detail 4 years of control, manipulation, and exhaustion, the midnight emails, the calls at 2 in the morning, the criticisms about my appearance, the stolen credit, the denied vacations, the threats when I got sick. I told them everything, and every word landed like a stone in a still pond. After my testimony Gregory's lawyer tried hard to twist my words, asking if I was just bitter about not being promoted or known for being difficult at work. I stayed calm and answered each question directly. No, I wasn't angry about promotion because Gregory had never offered one. No, I wasn't difficult, I was simply thorough, and there were 17 co-workers ready to confirm they'd been treated the same way. Yes, I had volunteered for extra projects but only because saying no meant retaliation. And I had proof that others who refused him were soon fired for fake reasons. The lawyer sat down quicker than expected. Then Patricia called her expert witness, a labor law professor from Northwestern who had written several books on worker rights. He walked the judge through my contract line by line explaining how each term went far beyond standard employment and crossed into modern servitude. He used phrases like unconscionable restrictions and violations of personal liberty, comparing my contract to historical examples of exploitative labor systems. His words made everyone in the courtroom uneasy. Meridian's own expert, a corporate attorney from New York, tried to argue that such clauses were normal in high-pressure financial sectors. The judge asked if he'd ever worked under such a contract himself. He admitted no. She asked if he'd want his children to sign one. He hesitated, then said he'd prefer to review it carefully. The judge gave a small knowing smile. The room was silent. Then Patricia stood and called Gregory to the stand. I watched him walk up confident as ever in his expensive suit, still convinced he could talk his way out of everything. But Patricia was ready, and this was the moment she'd been waiting for. Patricia began softly, asking Gregory about his position at Meridian and his management duties, letting him get comfortable. Then she played the recording. His voice echoed through the courtroom, calm and confident, saying he literally owned me. The gallery shifted uneasily. The judge watched him closely. Patricia asked what he had meant. Gregory stammered that it was just a figure of speech. Frustration, nothing serious. Everyone in high-pressure environments talked like that. She let him dig his own hole before calmly placing 17 printed emails on the stand. In each one he'd written phrases like "your time belongs to me" or "I own your output" or "you are my resource to deploy." She asked if those two were figures of speech. His face went red. He insisted none of it was literal and that everyone understood what he meant. Patricia then asked why Clause 31.9 existed if he didn't own his employees' time, why they needed written permission to work anywhere else. He claimed it was to avoid conflicts of interest. Patricia showed proof that he'd denied 6 unrelated side jobs, including a yoga instructor's weekend classes. He had no answer. She pressed further about the Donovan account, reminding him that he'd taken credit for my work and pocketed a $60,000 bonus. Wasn't that what an owner did with their property? He tried to defend himself, saying managers often present teamwork as their own, but she presented emails where he'd told me not to mention my role to clients. Every word stripped away his defense until nothing remained. Then she asked about the midnight emails and calls, if he believed employees had any personal time at all. He said financial work required full availability. She asked if he paid extra for that. He said it was covered by salary. She asked how a fixed salary could justify unlimited hours. He had no answer that didn't sound abusive. By the time he stepped down, he looked drained and furious. The courtroom felt heavy with tension and everyone knew what was coming next. The judge called a short recess, and when the session resumed, her tone had changed, calm but decisive. She announced that while she did not believe Gregory literally owned me in a legal sense, his words and actions clearly showed he believed he had authority far beyond normal employment boundaries. She described the contract as unconscionable and unenforceable. She voided it entirely and ordered Meridian to compensate me for 4 years of unpaid overtime plus damages for emotional distress and all legal costs. The total exceeded $400,000. But she wasn't done. She required Meridian Financial Services to submit every employee contract for review within 30 days and to remove any similar clauses. She also referred the case to the Department of Labor for further investigation. Finally, she imposed an additional $50,000 in personal punitive damages on Gregory himself for his statement and pattern of exploitation. Gregory leapt up, shouting that this was madness and that she was destroying his career. The judge warned him to sit or face contempt. Security moved closer until his attorney pulled him back down. Silence filled the room. Patricia squeezed my hand beneath the table and I realized I was shaking. Outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed, asking questions. Patricia gave a short statement about labor rights and the importance of reading contracts carefully. I said nothing. I just wanted to go home to my daughter. But deep down I knew this was only the beginning. Within a week, 3 more lawsuits were filed against Meridian by other employees Patricia had spoken to. Within 2 weeks, the Department of Labor officially launched an investigation. And within a month, Gregory was placed on administrative leave. The company's reputation was crumbling, and he became the perfect scapegoat. He tried to hire a crisis management firm to fix his image, but it was too late. Leaked emails revealed HR had warned him repeatedly about his treatment of staff, and expense reports showed years of personal spending charged to the company. The board fired him with cause, meaning no severance and no stock. 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder gone in 6 weeks. 2 months later, his wife filed for divorce, citing his character and financial collapse. His name turned into shorthand for workplace abuse. Business magazines published articles about exploitative contracts like his, and law schools started teaching my case as an example of employee rights. Patricia told me she'd never seen one lawsuit create such a ripple effect. Meridian was eventually forced to pay over $2 million in back wages and penalties to workers. They rewrote their policies, brought in auditors, retrained management, and barely survived the scandal. Gregory, on the other hand, couldn't find work anywhere in finance. He tried consulting, but no one wanted to hire the man known for saying he owned his employees. He started a blog about leadership, but it was instantly mocked online. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in another state, making a fraction of his old salary. Everything he built, his career, wealth, reputation, was gone. I used the settlement to clear my student debt, buy a modest house in a good school district, and start a college fund for my daughter. I also invested part of it into Patricia's practice because she had begun focusing entirely on employment rights and needed resources to help more workers on contingency. We became partners and close friends. Later, I went back to school and earned my own law degree while working full-time as a financial analyst at a firm that treated its people with respect. It took 3 years, but it was worth every sleepless night. Now I work beside Patricia, representing employees who face the same kind of exploitation I once did. Most of our cases end in victory, and the few that don't usually settle before trial because companies Have learned from what happened to Meridian. My daughter is 12 now and she knows the entire story. She understands why I fought, what it meant, and how one sentence from a man who thought he owned someone changed everything. She's growing up knowing her worth, reading contracts before signing anything, and speaking up when something feels wrong. Sometimes former Meridian workers reach out to thank me. They tell me they have time for their families now, that they no longer answer emails at 3 in the morning. Some have even become advocates themselves, teaching others about fair employment and worker rights. The case sparked change that continues to spread years later. Gregory tried once to strike back, filing a defamation suit claiming I had destroyed his reputation with lies. It didn't last a month. The court dismissed it immediately since every claim I'd made was backed by documents, emails, and the original trial record. His own lawyer withdrew from the case and advised him to stop before he humiliated himself further. That was the last time I heard from him directly, but his shadow still lingers as a reminder of what power unchecked can become. I see the echoes of that case everywhere now. Companies are more cautious with contracts. Employees are more informed. New organizations have formed to review agreements for those who can't afford attorneys, and law schools dedicate entire classes to analyzing exploitative labor practices. Whenever I speak at conferences or guest lectures, someone always asks what happened to Gregory. I tell them he built his entire identity on the belief that he could own people's time and dignity. And when the law forced him to prove it, that belief collapsed and took everything with it. I didn't destroy him, his arrogance did. I only made sure the truth was seen. I still remember him leaning back in that expensive chair, so certain of his authority, never imagining that one day someone would challenge him and demand proof. People who think they own others are always shocked when the property fights back. My daughter asked recently if I regret what happened, if I wish I'd just quit and walked away. I told her some battles are worth fighting not only for yourself but for everyone who comes after. Gregory's words revealed everything wrong with his world, and making him prove them didn't just free me, it freed many others and changed how companies see ownership of time and labor. That alone makes every hard moment worth it. A month ago I received an email from a law student who had studied my case in class. She told me she convinced her first employer to remove several unfair clauses from her contract before signing it. She thanked me for proving that workers have power and that contracts can be challenged. I saved that message in a folder where I keep others like it, letters from people who used my story to stand up for themselves. Most never had to go to court, they just needed to know it was possible to fight back. That's the real legacy Gregory left behind, not his ruined career or reputation, but the reminder that no one owns you simply because they pay you, and if someone claims they do, you can make them prove it and watch their world crumble when they can't. I was never owned, none of us are, and every person who realizes that becomes stronger, free to draw their own lines, to demand respect, and to push back when someone tries to cross them. So if you've made it this far, remember this: power only lasts as long as people believe in it, and the moment you question it, it begins to break. After everything's settled, I found a strange peace in how the story had unfolded. The chaos that once consumed my life had become something bigger than me. People began inviting me to speak about the case. Universities, worker organizations, even corporate panels wanted to understand how one sentence could ignite such a movement. I never sought attention, but I realized sharing mattered. Every time I told the story, someone in the audience recognized themselves in it. The long hours, the silent pressure, the fear of losing everything if they spoke up. I saw faces light up when they realized they had rights, that their contracts didn't define their worth. Patricia often joked that I had become her favorite success story, not just because we won but because I turned pain into purpose. And maybe she was right. The case taught me that fairness isn't given, it's demanded. It reminded me that strength sometimes looks quiet, like walking out of an office with a plan instead of shouting back. Gregory faded into obscurity, but his arrogance left behind a lesson that reached far beyond one company. It became proof that words can build cages or break them, and I chose to turn his into a key, one that opened doors for everyone who would never again hear the words "I own you" and believe them.